Next, we have Don Lowery from Nielsen. Mariela Rosario, the editor-in-chief of Hip Latina. And last but not least, Dante Simpson, the founder and CEO of DSA Media Group. So as David said, my name is Alyssa Betts. I am with Verizon Media. We are the umbrella company for Yahoo and AOL. Yahoo, were acquired by Verizon almost 2.5 years ago now, and they already owned AOL. So they put us together, and we do all things media with a diverse suite of brands, including Yahoo News, Sports and Finance, HuffPost, AOL Mail, Engadget, TechCrunch, Tumblr, and many more. I'm super excited to talk about these issues with you today and this panel on media advertising, D&I best practices. There are really interesting issues that tie into how media advertisers see groups of color. And what we've seen is media advertisers facing an industry-wide cultural competency problem that's limiting their ability to develop products and services and effectively reach and persuade consumers of color. So what do I mean when I say cultural competency? It's been defined a number of ways, but the one I like best is this one because of its simplicity. Cultural competence refers to an ability to interact effectively with people of color, people of different cultures and socioeconomic backgrounds. So that sounds pretty easy, right? I mean, I'm looking across the room. I feel like we might get some of this. But turns out that might not be the case in many instances. Consider these points. In January of 2018, the clothing retailer H&M had to apologize for an image appearing in its online store that showed a black child model wearing a hooded sweatshirt that said, "Coolest monkey in the jungle." The company later removed the image and said it would also pull the shirt from its stores nationwide. The image was widely criticized online for its reference to a monkey, which has been associated with racial and ethnic slurs. In October of 2017, Dove, the soap company owned by Unilever, apologized for a Facebook ad that showed a black woman removing her brown shirt to reveal a smiling white woman in a crisp white shirt underneath. In April 2017, the skincare brand Nivea pulled an ad that used the slogan, "White is purity," after it was accused of racial insensitivity. That same month, Pepsi had to apologize for a television commercial featuring Kendall Jenner that was criticized for borrowing imagery from the Black Lives Matter movement. Critics said the ad trivialized the protest movement and the killing of black people by police. Mistakes like this happen in the world of advertising with some regularity, and they have the potential to become even more acute as the US population becomes more diverse and people of color become the majority, but it doesn't have to. Our panel today will explore how they, as diverse media makers, are connecting brands to consumers and erasing problems related to cultural incompetency. We will also discuss innovative short-term and long-term strategies being developed to address the cultural competency problem, and hopefully provide policymakers and others who are concerned about this issue with recommendations to help support and scale these efforts. And of course, we want this to be interactive. We will take questions from you and open it up at the end of the discussion. But now I would like for our panelists to give you a brief background and talk a little bit about the work they're doing in this space. So could I start on the end with Licy, please?
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here today. How is everybody?
All right.
Come on, you've been here, you had lunch. How is everybody?
Great.
That's great to hear. I want to thank David Morgan and the association, along with Congresswoman Demings and all of you for being here today. I grew up on the Hill a long time ago, and something like this was just a dream. I literally, with a colleague of mine, one of the few people we could count on our hands that looked the way that we did. And so to be in a panel some 20 plus years, I'm much older than I look, because I worked here in the 90s. It's great to be here. So thank you for the leadership that you're bringing to this, David, and you and your team and the Congresswoman. I also am the first person that looks the way that I do within Burson Cohen Wolf. It's the third largest global public affairs agency in the world. It shouldn't be that way, and Burson Cohen Wolf is ahead of the curve, if you will, in the industry in terms of its diversity. Our CEO globally, who oversees 47 offices in 47 countries, 12 here in the United States, is a woman. The CEO of North America, my good friend Chris Foster, is African American. My good friend A.J. Jones, who used to work on Capitol Hill, he leads our global public affairs office in Washington, D.C., person of color. Coincidentally, all three first time in those positions. And then here I come, leading healthcare policy for the entire North America continent. It shouldn't be this way in 2019 that we're still the first, but I'm glad to be here. And my grandmother told me, once you're in, you cause as much trouble as possible. And so that's what I'm glad to be here with my fellow co-conspirators to share a little knowledge of sort of walking the beat of the PR industry and really public affairs industry that we all travel. I'll just say a few words about the work that we do and some of the internal challenges, and then I'll pass it on. We at Burson Cohen Wolf represent almost all of the brands that you are familiar with: Colgate, Hennessy, FedEx, Bank of America, and the list goes on and on. Some of the PR disasters that you mentioned, we represent them, but we didn't represent them on those campaigns. And I would throw in Heineken, who recently had an ad that said lighter is better, and they had to remove that too. But these PR snafus or disasters are completely avoidable. And where I sit, I still see these happening all the time, because you show up without a point of view that's not reflective of the very organizations and the audiences that are asking you to represent with trust their brand. And so, and yet it still happens day after day. Although less so, I think, I like to say, from where I sit with Burson Cohen Wolf. But we still have a long way to go. It's not just reflected in what we look like, but understanding the community and actually being from that community, as well as being able to speak the language. I'm also the first person in our organization to speak Portuguese and to speak Spanish. Again, it shouldn't be that way, but if you have clients around the world and your pitch is in another language and you can't speak that language, they're not going to ask you to show up. So that's the challenge. But what's really happening in our country now is that there are driving factors. We all know what they are: sociodemographics, socioeconomic and demographics, technological revolutions that are taking place. All of these are converging to force the companies, both in the corporate, civil society, and the private the government sector, to have to take a look at what's their brand objectives, their purposes, how do they shape themselves in the marketplace, and importantly, how do you navigate within this ecosystem that is uncertain, and speak to segments of the audience. So whether you're in health insurance and you want to engage in Medicare, because I oversee healthcare and that's where I spend a lot of time, and I have to explain to some of my colleagues, both within and outside the industry, where is Medicare going, the demographics. It looks like this room. That's why you should have an ad campaign that's reflective of that and not sort of the traditional. Or if you are, as we are grateful to be able to do, lead a national program for Hennessy, to get more people who look like the folks in this room into corporate America, and give us the pen to write that program. And that's where I came from this morning, with spending time with them. And one of the conditions that they mandated, which is true, increasingly true across the industry, is you not only have to show us before we allow you to grant you this contract that you have a diverse and inclusive staff, but you have to show us what you're doing to prove that throughout the organization. Not just show me what the statement is on the website that your CEO put there, but is the compensation for the CEO tied, as it is for many in the private industry now, to the diversity inclusive objectives? Is it part of your business growth strategy? Have you hired and have training programs within your organization to advance that? Or do you have onboarding and mentoring and training? All the things that you'd say we should have had a long time ago, but still that's rampant, I think, in our industry. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired, I'm sure like the rest of my colleagues, when you hear we just can't find qualified people. Look at this room. How did we come together? And like many things in life, it's relational. And I'm thankful because of the relationships that I've had with the folks within Burst & Cohen that I could be able to find that opportunity, because they're looking in the wrong places. And that's part of what we'll talk about today. So I want to just thank you very much for spending the time. Really, I'm looking forward to learning from all of you as well. There's still a lot of work to do in this industry. And the one thing that I'll say is this, that I'm tired, like you, of something that's well understood. We ought to be talking, as I think we are today, about what's the action. How do you hold not only us, but those within the industry, outside the industry, accountable? Congress just did that in a brilliantly terrific way, and we saw the change. But that kind of change is happening throughout all of our sectors of our economy, not just asking for it, demanding it, and then when you don't meet that obligation, you're moving to the back of the line or outside. So I want to thank you and thank my panelists, my peers here, for the terrific work that they're doing, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Licy. It's a great setup for me, actually, so I can talk about specifically what we're doing. I first want to go off script a little bit and acknowledge I guess, a bittersweet event that happened yesterday. The Chicago Defender, I'm a Chicagoan, the Chicago Defender, which I would dare to say, had it not existed, this room would never have come together. It was a beacon of light in many, many dark times in the struggle for not only civil rights, but for life, period. And anti-lynching campaigns they did in that publication for more than 100 years. Yesterday was the last edition, print edition, of the Defender. So for all of you who don't know about it, check it out a little bit on the website. It does have connections. And this morning when we had the conversations, I kept thinking about how long this discussion has really gone on in different formats. And the Defender really was a beacon for all of us here. So with that, I will do what Nielsen normally does, and that's give you a lot of numbers. However, I'm going to try to compress it because in the interest of time and the interest of keeping you awake, I will just kind of hit some of the highlights of what I want to talk about, which I think fits in the context of what this panel will talk about. So simply what Nielsen does, many, many things it does, we boil it down to we put the buyers and sellers of advertising together. So we have 4,000 clients across the world, every major media and every small media company in North America, Latin America, Asia, Europe, who does advertising work with our numbers. And we also work with the advertisers and the advertising agencies to give them analytics that they use to serve their clients. So I'm sure that many of people in this room are clients of Nielsen. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of give you a little picture of what's going on with regard to multicultural trends. Because for the last 10 years, this has really been a focus of the work that we're doing at Nielsen. I think anybody in any business in the United States is well aware of the fact that the growth in any business, media or consumer goods, is coming from overseas. It's not coming from the United States. So every major international company has to now focus on, well, we do have this untapped audience, or these untapped customers in the United States. We need to find out how to reach them better. And this emerging multicultural audience that they need to reach, they've started to pay a lot more attention to it. I use an anecdote all the time. If people watch what Procter & Gamble is doing, and if you've seen over the past couple of years just watching television advertising, and you see multicultural figures in those ads that you probably would have never seen even 10 years ago, that's become, and Mark Pritchard, who's the head of Procter & Gamble, billion-dollar advertiser every year, will say that specifically. I've heard him say it specifically, that if we don't tap this multicultural audience, our business, the biggest consumer packaged good business in the world, is not going to grow. So let me give you a few facts, and I wrote it down because I hear in Washington now, if you don't have facts, you could be accused of making things up. So I want to be sure that I had them exactly as there are. There are approximately 120 million multicultural Americans, which represents approximately 36% of the population. Multiculturals are expected to make up the majority of the American population in the next 25 years, although it seems every time this demographic information is updated, the time gets shorter. It's moving closer and closer and closer. You heard back a few years ago was 2063. Now it's closer to 2045, so it keeps moving in that direction. 51% of children under the ages of 11 are multicultural. 42% of millennials in those age years, 18 to 35-year-olds, are millennials. And finally, the buying power of multicultural Americans is currently estimated to be $3.8 trillion and expected to grow to $4.7 trillion by 2022. All of that just goes to show you what I said before, that the growth in consumer consumption of both media and consumer products is going to happen in multicultural communities. That's what's going on across the nation. And the people who run media companies, those behemoths, are well aware of that. And I can tell you from our client perspective at Nielsen, there is rarely now a meeting that we have with the buyers or the planners or the advertising platforms who don't want this information. They're asking us more and more and more, give us this information about multicultural audiences. Tell us how we can reach them. A few more facts, and this shouldn't be hard to figure out, hard to see, because if you just walk around your own neighborhoods or your own houses, you can see multicultural consumers have a higher percentage of ownership of computers, smartphones, tablets, consoles, smart TVs than the general market. In some cases, particularly in the area of video consumption, that is in double digits over what the general market looks like. Of those who spend 3 hours or more a day on social media, 22% are African American, 22% are Latinx, 16% are Asian Americans, and 13% are non-Hispanic whites. And in 2019, the long-held excuse from Hollywood that movies featuring multicultural casts would not be accepted in the general market was shattered when Coco won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Black Panther generated $1.35 billion in ticket sales worldwide, and Crazy Rich Asians was the most successful rom-com at the box office in 9 years. So I'll have some concluding remarks, and we talk about what are we recommending, because we do have some recommendations to our clients about reaching multicultural audiences, and I'll share that with you as we move along. Thank you.
Hi, guys. My name is Mariela. I've been working in the Latinx media space for about 10 years, launching multiple websites for Latina women specifically, from moms and now millennials. I'm the editor-in-chief of hiplatina.com, which is the largest website for Latina millennials in the United States. So please check it out. Shameless plug. Thanks, Tony. So I've been creating, I'm coming from the other side of this equation. I've been creating branded content with brands from P&G to Kellogg's to Pepsi. 10 years ago, we were really like banging on everyone's doors, like, come on, come advertise with us. And now the tables have turned quite a bit, which is good. However, there are still tons of problems that relate directly to cultural competency when it comes to actually executing campaigns that are specific to our demographic. Just an example is Latinos are normally looked at as a very homogeneous group, and we're actually really diverse. A lot of the narratives around immigration don't necessarily apply to all Latinos. There's Puerto Ricans who don't need to cross borders. There's Cubans who, are treated differently. I'm not going to get into politics. And there's just everyone has a different experience when they're coming into the United States. There are definitely unifying factors, but even things just like Afro-Latina identity, indigenous identity, there's all these things that are, I was just talking to Carla about this, there's all these things that are really pushed to the side when these brands are trying to connect with us. And I think that that's something that really needs to be brought to the forefront, something that we're definitely trying to do at H Code Media and with Hip Latina. And this year was actually the first time ever that a brand came to us and was like, hey, we really want an Afro-Latina influencer included in one of the campaigns, and it made me want to cry. So things are definitely changing, but I think we all need to work together to really keep pushing that narrative forward, and finding, commonalities, and also, celebrating our differences.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dante Simpson, and I am the CEO of DSA Media Group. So I'll give you a sense of what we do, who we are, who we deal with. But if I could just put it into one sentence, we're just simply marriage counselors. We marry two brands, two companies, two clients together for a common purpose. Arguments happen. We're there in the middle to fix that. So we are simply your marriage counselor agency. I come from the world of fashion. I come from the world of music. My last brick and mortar job was actually with Sony BMG, and I decided to steal from the rich and give to the poor. So Sony was the rich and I was the poor. So I took 7 colleagues of mine and we started DSA Media Group. We strategically picked individuals that would cause Sony BMG to be our first client. So we took individuals for which they really needed, that were incredibly talented. They were our first client. Our oldest client is Sony Pictures. They're still with us today. So everything that you see coming out of the Screen Gems house, Sony Pictures house, that comes through us from a marketing, branding perspective, as well as from a partnership perspective. Outside of the Sony house for films, and I'm going to stop that sentence. Again, I work in the world of sports, entertainment, fashion. That's my world, but I'm the bridge between these 3 individuals. So we also represent brands, and we are the agency of record for brands such as Mercedes-Benz, Sprite. We have a litany of clients that we work with, Body Armor. Great job to Kobe Bryant and what he's done with them. We do a lot of their production and things of that nature. So we are the spend that reaches out to our wonderful Latinx folks. We look for the incredible analytics from Nielsen. We absolutely look for talent that are all over the place. So these 3 individuals we work with on a regular basis. But I would say that the beauty of what we do, and I come from a football background as well. I love the sport. And one of the things that quarterback coaches teach quarterbacks is you don't throw the football where the wide receiver is. You throw it where he's going to be. That's who we are. We actually are where it's going to be. So I'll give you a sense of what that means. While a lot of people are doing their advertising on linear, we play in the unexpected spaces. So I'm the African-American gentleman that plays in the world of video games. We represent some of the biggest brands in the world of esports, some of the biggest brands in the world of video game, from a production, from a branding. And we also created, if any of you are familiar with Getty Images, we are the Getty Images of esports. We own the IP. We license it out for media purposes, for commercial purposes. It does not exist. Wonderful to know that we have a representative from Verizon here, as we will be announcing some work that we'll be doing with Verizon Riot. Love what you guys are doing there, that studio. So they're stepping into this space because that's where the audience is. So we still do radio ads. We still do television ads, but we understand that second screen is the key. We understand the value of Gen X, Gen Y, but at the same time, we are bringing folks of color into that space and speaking that voice. One of the beautiful things about some of these categories, and I'll give you another category that we play that's non-traditional, we are the agency for WWE. So the craziness that you see going on with WWE, we have a lot to do with those brand representations, not necessarily of the talent, but the partnerships. The beauty of that is a lot of people don't realize exactly how big the WWE is globally. It's tremendous, and the numbers that I'll give you guys a little bit later will probably shock you in comparison to some of your other main sports. We don't play a lot in the world of football, baseball, or basketball, but we do work with the players' associations for all of them. So that's kind of where we play. And I always tell folks, love what you do, but find your niche. You don't have to walk that road that everyone else walks, because when we feel disrespected, overlooked in certain areas, there's other groups that would absolutely love to talk to all of you. And we just don't realize it because we're too stuck in trying to hear. And I think that Tyler Perry said it best. You guys are trying to get, Oscar so white. I'm down here building my own table. So I say to everybody, don't get so caught up in that. Find your own, build your own, because there are folks out there, especially this next generation coming up, they want that wisdom. They think that it's cool that you know what you know, that we know what we know, and that you all know what you know. they find that to be incredible because they're just winging it. You know what I mean? They're the content creators. They know how to create the content, and that's kind of how they play. And I'll give you an example of what that means, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Lisa. There was a brand a while ago, this was back in 2011, that it was just a bunch of kids. It started out with a guy named Justin, and he walked around with a camera on his head, and he taped everything that he did, and it was actually called Justin TV. He kind of transitioned that, and it became a platform for video gamers. They came to us, and they were like, hey, we need a little bit of help. You know these brands. We don't know any of them, but we have this content. We created an exit strategy for that company. Some of you in the room may know that company. That company is actually Twitch. If you're familiar with Twitch and what they sold for, and the brands that were lobbying for them, to actually be able to draw that exit strategy, to actually be able to tell these kids who were not business people, they just knew how to make content, and they made content 24 hours a day. I'll give the folks in the room that are not familiar with Twitch, basically it's a streaming service. It's an OTT streaming service for gamers. And now musicians have come, so names that we all know, Drake, Shaq, so many people have come in now and invested in this community. And there was a bidding war. Google offered $1 billion for this company, just kids making content. They offered $1 billion. We turned it down. The upside of the partner that we took was even better, which was Amazon. Amazon paid $970 million. They bought it. They have it right now. So all of the Prime stuff, all of the data analytics that you're looking at for Amazon content, obviously they went and bought Whole Foods and things of that nature. They wanted the data. The data was so unbelievably valuable to them. And that's where we play. Understanding that data, bridging it to a client, a brand, music, and artists. I was just having a conversation with Londell. A lot of these kids are having problems getting music because it's licensed. So every time they get music and they post it on YouTube, it gets taken down, even though their content is amazing. Imagine if there was a partnership between the record labels. They're emerging artists that may not have the followers. Kids are on this nonstop repetitively. And I'm going to say this, and then I will turn it over to you. Final thing, I'll say this to you guys, and you guys can feel free to Google it if you'd like. We live in the world of Google. 2018, Netflix had their upfronts, and they made a statement, and they said who their #1 competitor was. It wasn't HBO. It wasn't Hulu. It was actually Fortnite. It was the game Fortnite. They viewed that as their #1 competitor because it had such a captive audience, and those kids were on repetitively, nonstop, all day. Understanding where the audience is, building something where there's a value, there's a benefit to a client. It comes with data. It comes with eyeballs. That's what we do. And I will come right back to you, but I have to turn it over to Alyssa this time.
Yeah, no, I really like where you're taking that, because identifying sort of the landscape and outlook going forward is something that is worth exploring. And I want to know from the panel, how do you think marketers and advertisers are seeing the future along with diverse audiences, with the population changes that we expect to come, with the numbers that you just read to us about what the demographics look like? Are they taking these audiences seriously? And are they embracing diversity and inclusion? How are they doing that?
I'll jump in and I'll keep this really short, and I'll turn it over to you guys. There's a word that I hate. I'll share that word with you. It's called over-indexing. Basically, what that means is, and I'll use Timberland as an example. I'm from New York. So Timberland never advertises to us. They never market to us. But we loyally wear their product without them advertising $1 in our community, without them putting anything towards us. We wear them, we rap them, we sing them, we pose it, get the fresh Tims. We do all of that, and we've done it for years. And that's called over-indexing. When we support brands that don't support us, and they look at it and they say, hey, we don't have to market to them. Let's put our dollar towards another community that may not be wearing us to try to bring them up to speed. They don't understand disruptors. And we're living in a disruptive era. And if they don't start to fix this, and I'm talking about all brands, start to value who we are and what we do and what we bring to the table, there is a disruptor that's going to take their business away from them. And that's the bottom line to all of this. And on that note, if you guys know the story about Iceberg, and if you know the story about Rockaware, you know that one day Jay-Z went to Iceberg and he said, hey, guys, I rap about your clothes all the time. Why don't you do an endorsement deal? They said, no, we don't need you. He created Rockaware and sold it for over $250 million. I don't even know if you guys have even heard of Iceberg. They went under faster than the Titanic. If you don't appreciate who we are and what we bring, we will crystal you, and we will then ace of spades our situation.
I'm going to flip the script just a little bit, but I think it'll connect to what we're talking about. And Licy, you may have some views on this. You mentioned the Kendall Jenner disaster that happened. There was no secret in the trades. It was reported between the production costs and the schedule, the media schedule that had been set up for that, they ate $50 million. $50 million. And of course, everybody, my friends at Nielsen, including non-African American friends, were saying, who looked at that thing before they let it go? Who looked at it? It would be so simple. I could have told them, probably shouldn't go there, right? Probably shouldn't be there. So this is connected to what you're saying. And from an internal standpoint, and one of the good things that has happened in our company in the past 10 years, as our clients have pushed us to be more aware of what multicultural audiences are looking for, we've had to look inside to say, if we don't have the people internally who can tell us what's going on, and they can look at these things, not only from a current but a future perspective, we're not going to be able to serve our clients the best. So I'll turn that over to you.
I couldn't agree with you both. I mean, it not only impacts your bottom line, is these companies choose not to work with you because you can't reflect the audiences that they want to reach, but it also impacts your organizational capacity to actually do that work. And you don't remember those agencies that aren't able to do that because they're gone now. But the ones that are still here, many here are doing that, and they do that in a number of ways through both the broadening access to the recruitment, getting more people in that look like the folks in this room, but also making sure once you're in, how do we create a culture that's inclusive? Not just enough to get the right mix, but how does that mix work together, and how do we make sure that you stay and are promoted into these positions of leadership? So that's some of the best practices that we're working on within BCW. I want to give an example just on the opposite side of this, and this is Hennessy. How many people here know that the Hennessy is was one of the first funders of the NAACP, or National Urban League? So, and people wonder, our community is drinking a lot of this, but there's a disconnect, right? And so, right. And part of the work that they came to us is to help them understand. That's part of this program. We represent Hennessy on 13, 14 lines of business worldwide. But this was an inverse, where the company knew what its value, what its patrimony is, but it wasn't explaining that. And so when it wanted to go into corporate America and make it more diverse and inclusive and bring people in, they wanted a partner to help them do that. And so they brought us in. And then, unlike Drake, they brought Nas says, I'm in. And so Nas is part of this effort to help get more people in as among the other influencers. Hennessy is not alone. This is an organization, one of the most prominent fashion houses in the world, that demands diversity and inclusivity before you can even show up and work with them. And they're one of a number. I think to your question, Alyssa, is that if you are a PR or a public affairs specialist, which is what we are, and I didn't say that representing these brands on communication objectives, but we're also helping them shape the political and policy landscapes. So if I'm not doing the thing with Nas and Hennessy, I'm on Capitol Hill fighting a war now as a lobbyist too, and that's part of the continuum of what BCW does, both here in the United States and across the world. But we're helping to connect these the brands so that help them with the demand for making sure that the audiences that they represent are reflected in the work that they're wanting to communicate. And if you're not able to do that, you're not going to last too long. The PR and the PA industry today not just has a spotlight, but it's a searchlight, looking inside these companies to understand what's going on internally that speaks to what you're trying to offer externally. And I think to your question, if you're not able to do that in an era where it's increasingly held, companies are being held accountable, then you're going to fall by the wayside. And the last piece I'd mention is there are examples of entities like Hewlett-Packard that worked with another global PR company. They did an audit at the end of all the agencies that they worked with for this purpose on diversity inclusion. And then they called out this agency, not just among internally, but they called them out publicly. And that's the accountability, that agency wasn't reflective of the diversity and inclusion objectives of Hewlett-Packard. So both the corporate and the civil society and government are holding companies and entities like us here accountable for what it is that they're hoping to achieve.
I think with the Latinx community, it's pretty interesting because traditionally speaking, I think a lot of companies just thought they could do advertising in Spanish. And then it would just be enough, you know? But the reality is that US-based Latinas have $1 trillion in buying power, and a lot of us are acculturated in second and third generation. Interestingly enough, a lot of us don't even speak Spanish and are now struggling to teach our children how to speak Spanish because we realize what an important tool that is. And so I think now what brands are really trying to figure out is how to crack that nut of like the acculturated bicultural Latina women here in the United States, since we drive the majority of the consumer decisions in our households. And you know, the way to do that is always to have people on your teams who represent the community that you're trying to reach out to. I've been seeing that happening more and more, but again, within that, like we need to see different kinds of Latinos in the room, or else we're all going to be, you know, getting marketed to with like Shakira and Sofia Vergara, and like, you know, we don't all look like that. And so I think that's just like the drum that I've been banging for a really long time, and I too am tired. But it is important, and I hope that we can sort of see that change happening more. I did see there's one ad that will always stick in my brain because I'm not sure if it was intended for Latinos, but it hooked all of us. And it was a car ad for Volkswagen where he's like, oh, you forgot to bring the music. And all he had was like a learning how to speak Spanish tape. And they listened to it for three hours and stopped to get gas. And then they get out of the car and they're speaking like fluent Spanish to each other. And if you're Latino and you hear the way they're speaking Spanish, you know that they're both Spanish was their first language, clearly. But it's just so funny because A, if you're trying to learn Spanish, you really relate to it. And B, it was like a sly nod to our community, and it was one of the more effective ad campaigns. And when I saw that, I was like, there was a group of Latinos who worked on this campaign, and it was really smart. So I hope to see more things like that. I think the best way to do that is really partnering with content creators who are already making incredible content and tapped into that audience. And that's also happening more and more. So hopefully the trend continues to grow.
Yes, let's hope so. Do you think that businesses are feeling pressure from consumers to provide that type of content ads that are relatable and that with people that look like them are speaking in a way that they relate to? What's your assessment of that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think, with social media, the call-out culture is just so strong now that you can't get away with making these kinds of mistakes that may have been brushed under the rug. With the Kendall Jenner thing, it was crazy. Same with H&M. Like, they lost, like, a huge hip-hop star was supposed to be launching a line with them.
The Weeknd, I think.
Yeah, and The Weeknd and G-Eazy, actually, ironically enough. And they both pulled out of their deals because of that huge mistake. So, yeah, I don't think that there's the luxury of sort of just saying, oh, we're going to generally market to everyone and everyone being white people and expect you to consume our products.
Just a quick anecdote about that. I didn't mention the fact 2018 was the first time that rap and hip hop was a #1 selling form of music in the United States. So I had to find out about who Migos was and Weeknd, and I knew who Kendrick Lamar was, but I did do some research on that. But it connects to what you're saying. Some of the stuff that Nielsen has done in relationship to all of that stuff I was telling you before was looking at cultural influencers, and and we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. Every year it's just consistent. Who's having the biggest influence on culture? And again, you don't have to, be a genius to see what's happening. African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians are having the biggest, in whatever form it is, with regard to entertainment, music, et cetera, that's happening. So major corporations obviously look to respond to that and adapt to that. And as I mentioned the thing about Procter & Gamble, I mention it over and over again because I tell people, look at what they're doing. If these people have made this decision, and that is, Mark Pritchard tells that story about how he had to fight, literally. He went to the top rung at Procter & Gamble and said, we're going to spend X amount of money launching these various products, and we're going to launch them towards communities of color. So the industry, as all of you pros in here know, it's a copycat industry. Once people start in advertising and they find a successful format, they will do the same thing. But the evidence is just clear about where that's going.
Right. And I would add it's happening in other sectors, not just here in the United States, but globally. One of the agencies that we represent is Bloomberg globally, and they, by the pushback they were getting in different markets around the world, recognized that they didn't have enough diverse gender equity on their financial analyst shows. And so they quickly realized that if they didn't change their business model and some of the objectives in these key markets, Australia, Middle East, parts of Latin America, here in the United States, as well as in Europe, then they were going to lose the viewer segment there. And so part of what they brought us in to do is to help them prop up, if you will, offices in parts of the country, in parts of the world that don't exist, and then build the content and shape the strategy for how to engage in the Middle East, in Asia, and in Latin America with segments of the population that they had not pulled from in order to have on their programming, so that in these markets they were better able to respond to what they were hearing from. That was a business decision that they made, forced by consumers saying, I'm going to turn the channel and go over to another or get another news source instead of going to you, not just in one market, but across the globe, unless you change the way you operate within the marketplace. I think there's a response. There are others that are slow to get there, for sure. But I think there are some that you may not know of that are making that effort. Some pulled, some on their own.
So do you think that pressure right now is strong enough, or what do you think needs to be done to change some of what we're seeing? Do you think there's a role for MMCA to play, the Media Diversity Congressional Caucus? What are some solutions to get around this?
Well, in Congress, in the federal level, I would say this. We know that there are diversity and inclusivity programs and to help make sure that within the federal government, folks, including a number of the folks here, as well as those others, contract are made up of a diverse group of entities. And so that's not new. What is new is that federal, state, and local agencies, together with other private sector corporations, are demanding that if you're going to contract with the federal, state, and local governments, that you meet these anti-discrimination laws and have the diversity and inclusivity as part of your program. Otherwise, we won't contract with you. One of our largest contracts for BCW is with Veterans Health. So any of the communication and the healthcare related work and sort of rebranding, re-imaging of Veterans Healthcare Administration comes from the agency. We would not have been able to do that if we had not been able to demonstrate our own DI objectives, not just externally, but internally, not just here in the United States, but across the globe. And so I think for Congress, the offices that represent that, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, is one that oversees the contracting in this way and enforcing these laws. That's an agency that has to be beefed up. It's wholly underfunded now, but is the main mechanism for holding private and public sector accountable for federal contracts into the billions of dollars. This is your money going to agencies to do work that ought to be reflective of the communities that they're operating in, and oftentimes they're not. I'd be angry, and you should be as well, in demanding that together with Congress, and there are members like Congresswoman Demings and others who know and are fighting that, but it's lifting up these efforts to make sure that in the federal contracting space, it's just one of several that I think Congress needs to make sure, and private sector needs to push them to do that.
And I'll also add to that. I think that, and I'm going to apply this to MMCA, I think that part of the strategy is to get our messaging consistent within this room and then flip the model. So as I look at out in this room, if I were to say to, I'm a 70s baby, I grew up in Atlanta. If I were to say to you guys, for example, what stays in this house, or what happens in this house stays in this house, we've all heard that. You better be home when the street lights come on. We've all heard that. You know the smell of the hot comb when it hits the hair. You know it. Like, we have experiences, although we come from different places, that we can all relate to. Sometimes it's bringing the other folks into this room and then holding them accountable. So I think that that's the next step of this. This is absolutely tremendous, having everybody here together, exchanging, ideas, concepts, so on and so forth. I think that that's part of it, is that there's experiences, there's feelings, there's emotions that we all share. We can watch a video together and see something, an atrocity, and we're all devastated and hurt. There's some people that look at that same thing and just go have dinner and don't think anything about it. We need to get folks that aren't seeing what we're seeing and actually bringing them into the room. I often take our experiences. There's many times that I'm the only person of color at the table, and I bring our experiences right to them. And sometimes you have to bring it to them and put it in their face, but then also they've got to feel the energy of us in the room when there may only be 20 of them, but they're willing and they're open-minded and willing for change. So I think that that's the next step of this, is where does the change happen? It happens when we go out into the world and make change. It happens when we bring folks in and hold them accountable to make change as well. So I think that that's the duality of the relationship that MMCA is building, and I look forward to seeing what the future holds for that as well.
And I'll be quick in response to that. So last week, Reverend Jesse Jackson had his Rainbow Push conference in Chicago that he does annually, and he was there, and I looked at him, and I said, that's one of the great old lions. He's probably the last of the old lions who's around. And when the history is written about advancements for multicultural people, because one of the things Reverend Jackson did early in his career was focus on multicultural, like Dr. King did later in his life, they were just loud, right? They organized and they were loud. And some of the things that we're talking about today, I think about how progress was made and how in so many ways, particularly in the ad agencies, where back in the 60s or 70s, you'd hear these stories, there were no people of color in the major ad agencies. So there was some advancements made, but a lot has pulled back. So the challenge is to all of us. None of the things that were accomplished in that period wouldn't have been accomplished if people didn't individually have a point of view and wanted their point of view stated and then collectively get together to try to do that. I mentioned those economic power, those economic figures about buying power. That's massive. And that's massive numbers. And people in the end will pay attention to that if we can smartly think about how you bring that attention and that focus.
I think coalition building is incredibly important. One of the things that I was talking to someone last night about was how there's so many different media organizations pushing for representation. We don't work together enough, so MMCA is really important in doing that. And we need to support each other's efforts, whether you're Latinos supporting African American and Black art, or vice versa, or Asian Americans. We get siloed a lot, and it just works against us because, the reason why Crazy Rich Asians made so much money wasn't because only Asians went to go see it. The reason why Get Out was so incredibly successful was because we all wanted to see that media, and we need to just really support each other and put our money where our mouths are. Because at the end of the day, that's really all that matters is the numbers. We can sit here and be like kumbaya all day, but we need to really be spending money at the box office. We need to be watching TV and make sure Nielsen's counting up those numbers around rap music, Latin trap, all these things that are exploding now and really changing our culture, and they're not going to pay attention until that happens.
Licy, I'll let you close it out, and then we'll take questions from the audience, so get ready.
Sure. I would just add very quickly, how many people here have gone to a conference, sat on a panel, or seen a panel and it's just all men, white. No offense to my white friends, right? So the head of the NIH, the largest research institution in the world, last week said, this is Francis calling, he says, I will no longer sit on a panel, which they're commonly known as manels, right? Right, as he said, on a panel where it's all white men talking about health research, whatever the case. He set that standard for the entire agency. He put it out on his personal blog and said, I will not do that. And he also went one step further and said, I won't sit on a panel if the organization hasn't told me how it ensured that the audience is diverse and inclusive. And so those are efforts that MNCA and members of Congress and others can play a role in. And there are, and I'll tell you afterward, there are a couple national sites that track panels across the country, high profile and so on, where there are only one particular representation there. And so it's important that you take action. That's why this panel is very unique in itself, but that doesn't happen. And so that's an effort where I agree we need to get in and bring our own. But at the same time, when we have opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to be there unless you change the panel and change that adversity in your audience, as Francis Collins said, then that's where a part change happens. And I think that's a great role for MNCA to help lead.
Great. If we could get questions at the mic. And please, no speeches, just questions.
Great. You must have known I was going to give a speech. My name is Zakai Free. I'm with Sweet Weirdness. That's WYRDNESS on all platforms. Let's talk cannabis. So we have a $28 billion industry, they're saying, by 2021. And this is an industry that has been preserved and cultivated by urban culture for over 40 years. Now that we're going legal, how can media brands and influencers leverage this opportunity to ensure more equitable legislation first, as well as media messaging and brand partnerships around cannabis?
I love that question because one of the industries that we spend a lot of time in is in this industry, particularly around CBD and these oils that are going into various products. And I was just with the CEO, Chris Foster, yesterday, the first CEO of color in a global PR firm, talking just about this, because I see it across the country that this economy is of cannabis and who is becoming wealthy from it. It's developing right in front of our eyes. And what's happening, we can see us on the sidelines. And so one of the efforts that we've been making is to help lift up and radically disrupt the conversation that's happening within these economies, to demand and ensure that organizations and entities within these economies have a fair opportunity to get access to the licenses that are being distributed, and to push and hold accountable publicly elected officials, some who are on the right side of this and others who just they're only looking at the bottom line, that there's more diversity in an economy that pretty soon is going to overtake many other aspects of the economy. And I don't want our communities to be left out of this enormous wealth that's taking place across the country.
Great. Oh, can I hold you so we can get some more in? Next question. Thank you.
Sure. Don Lowery just dropped a mic, right? I'm Neil Foote, president of the National Black Public Relations Society, among other things. The Chicago Defender newspaper is not printing anymore. So I want to refer to a comment that was made in our previous panels. What is the role of advertising communities supporting black media, and how do we make sure that those become viable entities? Or is that just not an issue that we need to worry about anymore? I'll stop there.
It's absolutely an issue that we should address. And that's part of our community as drivers. We should be driving dollars to those communities, to those entities, seeing our publications fall off, especially, a lot of you guys know Sean King, dear friend of mine, him kind of bringing back, and kind of doing this work. There are folks that are out there that are realizing that we need, as our publications dissipate, our voice dissipates, our story dissipates. a lot of things are starting to happen, and now media is the message, and we're receiving message from folks that are not like us. So absolutely, when you say what is our role, what's the role of media, it's driving it, and it's almost forcing it, because a lot of these brands, especially major brands, are not going to see the quote-unquote value in it because they want to be in major brand. They want to be in Washington Post. They want to be in LA Times, New York Times, that type of thing. There's got to be a point where you put down, and we do this with each one of our clients, where they'll give us, for example, $10, and we'll tell them that we want to take 15% of that, 20% of that, and drive that to a certain community. And we'll use that as our test, and then we'll show them return against that to prove value. So we overexceed in other areas such that we can use that and provide value back to from Black publications.
Great. Next question.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I'm a journalist at ABC News Network. And I really love what you guys had to say, especially, I wasn't here at the beginning of the meeting, but Licy, is that how you pronounce? About what you said about the NIH. And so interesting. I was on the phone with a source yesterday about the NIH's investment in communities of color. As a journalist, a lot of times, especially at a major news network, I feel like I'm behind the curve because, and I also feel like my younger colleagues, I'm an 80s baby, yay. I feel like my younger colleagues have been bred to do this. They started early. I actually have a colleague whose parents came over from a different country, had her, took her back in anticipation of her having a more successful life in America, and brought her here when she was a teenager so she could go to college here. So she has the values from her home country, but they had the foresight to do that. My question is, what are we doing to get younger people, basically African Americans, up to speed? Because even as a graduate student, a person who's feels like I'm in a very fast-paced environment, I still feel a little bit behind the curve from people who've just basically been brought up into this from a very young age.
Hold your answer for me. I want to get these last two in because we have to wrap for the next panel. What are we doing to get young people up to speed? Question.
My name is Yaya Fanusi with the United States of Africa 2017 Project Task Force. The 54 countries in Africa will become like America 2025. So you guys in the media, find out about it. If you don't, it will be people who don't look like us who will be making all the billions and trillions. Oh, about that, cannabis, in the 60s, we were the ones saying legalize it in California. I've been in this country since 7. Don't smoke, go produce and sell.
Okay, words of wisdom. And last question.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Corin, and I'm Public Affairs Specialist at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. One of the topic areas that I work on at the museum, amongst others, is sports. And the museum works with athletes a lot to help harness their massive social media presence to help us share the stories of the museum beyond the walls of the museum in Washington, D.C. And my question for Mr. Lowery and Mr. Simpson is what role you see the media playing in helping to shape contemporary issues such as taking a knee, athletes participating in peaceful protests, using their platforms while still maintaining their patriotism. What role do you see the media in helping to frame those discussions versus the responsibility more so falling to the league?
Can I get one person to answer that if they want? And then let's go back to the young people getting up to speed, and we'll have to close out.
I'll answer this from a different perspective. I was the public relations director for the 6-time world champion New England Patriots for 10 years. I was there for 2 Super Bowls, but that's that. I just had to throw that in. So from that perspective. So I will be quick. With regard to one of the great trends that I think is happening, and we're looking now, we're all talking about 50 years ago, 1968, 1969, a celebration of all of the protests that African-American athletes led. Made a difference, truly made a difference in how the landscape changed. And at the museum, I know that that's part of the makeup Now, these athletes, like LeBron, we're mentioning media, Steve Curry, they have economic power. They have economic clout. So they can take their civil protests to a higher level, a place where they didn't go before, and get partners because of their economic abilities that they wouldn't have had before. They have money to do that. So I think from the perspective of the media follows the story, right? The media follows the story, and who's ever telling the story, they're going to get the story down. So I think that athletes have a more effective way. Derek Jeter started to sing the tribute, right? The athletes are participating in. I think that's a model of what's going on in the future, and plus all of the social media that now the athletes, professional athletes, collegiate athletes use. That's truly making a change.
And I'm gonna
young people.
I'm going to give you one response because we are well beyond our time, and then I'm going to hand off the mic. Two things I want you to look up. I want you to look up Google West. I want you to look up Microsoft West. That's a partnership between HBCUs that our company did, if you're familiar with it, helping coders. So actually giving them jobs when they come out with your major tech. Part of the process here is us taking a step back, a generation, getting them in college, actually partnering them, because obviously we know that people of color, from a code perspective, from a tech perspective, are incredibly underrepresented. Actually creating partnerships. Remember I told you I was the marriage counselor. Creating partnerships between the schools and these tech companies such that they're getting those internship opportunities. They're getting the business opportunities when they walk out of school. Sorry I'm talking so fast, but I know we're...
No, appreciate it. Mariela, did you want to say anything on the last one? Everyone, thank you so much for a wonderful panel. Give our panelists a round of applause. Catch them after. Thank you.